Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Magicians. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, let's start off with the whole Alice and Eliot thing. It's actually interesting because I think this is the most time Alice and Eliot have ever spent alone together. I don't think they've ever been alone together because anytime they've ever been around each other, there's other people around. And so I think this is kind of an interesting thing, especially because, well, obviously Alice, woke up and found out like where she buried Quentin, like a little bottle kind of representing that fragment of his soul that she used to resurrect the golem. It didn't go straight back to the underworld. So Quentin isn't 100% at peace. So she decides to go to Fillory, to a place known as the Mountain of Ghosts. And obviously as she was going there, she wasn't going to say anything to anyone, but Eliot's like, whoa, what are you up to? What are you doing? Because, Eliot kind of wants to be involved because he knows that if Alice is doing something, it's like, oh, maybe it's something that involves Quentin. It's kind of, because like, he knows that she's the one kind of suffering the most during this Quentin thing. So I thought it was so fascinating. The fact of the matter is that, I guess it's also the thing is Eliot kind of needed something else to kind of keep his mind preoccupied too. And also being around Alice, I think, will probably help him kind of think of Quentin as well. But she informs him about what's going on. And at first he's like, oh crap, like, oh wow, you did that? Because I think there's a part of him that was probably almost excited by the thought that knowing that Alice did that. But obviously it was a 12-year-old Quentin and everything. But obviously I don't think the conversation necessarily went there. But now it's like, oh, I need to take this back. So Eliot kind of tags along on a journey, which obviously Alice was reluctant, like I said, because they're not really friends. Like, she's friends with other people in the group. I mean, granted, her relationship with the others is kind of complicated, but especially after season 3, and it got better during season 4, but after season 3's finale, obviously there's been an issue, so it's a whole complicated thing. So obviously as they're taking the trail up, because to get to the mountain they also have to take these this particular rocks, and they're gonna have to ground them up as a means of keeping the takers away, because not only do the takers take people, they also take things that are most valuable to you. And then we also see in the little purse that Eliot does still in fact have the letter, so that was really interesting. And obviously as they go up the trail, it turns into a little tit for tat, and I thought it was actually a very cathartic argument they had, and I thought was really interesting, because when the whole thing went down, I started thinking to myself, Eliot, it's like Alice doesn't know about the whole thing with Quentin and Eliot. I mean, like, no one does. I guess that's something that's only existed between them. I doubt he's ever told Margo about, because Margo's under the impression like, oh, you lost one of your good friends. No one knows about that. Like, that secret it died with Quentin, and it's something only Eliot. I mean, it died with Quentin because Quentin kind of didn't think it meant anything in the grand scheme of things, because he thought it meant anything to Eliot. We'll get to that soon enough. But I thought it was this interesting back and forth, because for Alice, it's like, this is supposed to be my journey. He was my boyfriend. I loved him. And it's just kind of like you're tagging along, because it's almost like, because in her mind, it's like you're trying to alleviate some guilt, because like Quentin died because of everything. But obviously like you have Eliot kind of snapping back, being like, this is actually all your fault. You're the one that stopped everything because of what Alice did in the season 3 finale, trying to make it so they couldn't bring magic back. That's where all the events spiraled, and that led to the beast possessing Eliot, and Quentin at the end of the day ended up dying trying to save him at the end of the day. And it's like, so but then obviously it's like, that was kind of harsh, but Alice is like, but correct, but he was like, but it might have been correct, but it's not right, because at the end of the day you can see what this is. Even at that moment in the episode, you're like, these are two people who very much loved Quentin. There are people in that group who cared about Quentin. Losing him hurt them because he impacted each of their lives, but and that's the thing where like Julia, like I said, Alice and Eliot are the ones kind of having the hardest time processing it. I think Julia has too, but I think for her, it's just a different situation with Julia. I think for her, she's so preoccupied with trying to preserve what Quentin's did, what he sacrificed to give magic back to the world, free from the library's control, and I think because of that, her situation is just a little different. She's trying to honor him by continuing to do good in his name by the sacrifice he made. Well, they're obviously handling it, like I said, this on a more personal level, even to the point Eliot is thinking he's hearing Quentin's voice. That never really 100% got resolved, but it did seem like it's just because he's still in the grieving process and stuff like that. That I'm wondering, is that all there is to it, or is there something more to that? We'll have to, ultimately wait and see. But obviously, the first tour guy ends up getting snatched up. But then they meet another dude who, interesting enough, is the actor who plays Robin Hood in Once Upon a Time. That was pretty dope. I feel like there's something I've seen him in more recently. I want to say it was Timeless. I forgot who he was. I think in Timeless, he's the character he played in Timeless is the character that James Bond is based on. Because James Bond is based on like a real spy or whatever. But like a more fictional version. No, right. It was the dude who wrote James Bond. He played the dude who kind of took his stories and kind of turned it into James Bond. That's kind of what that was. That's what I kind of remember from. I feel like there might have been something else, but I think Timeless was kind of the other thing aside from Once Upon a Time that I know him from. But regardless, I thought, I was like, oh. And it was interesting, too, because he killed a taker. This is actually cool, too, because this was our first time seeing a taker. Like, we saw it with, like, it had, like, this, like, metal thing, like, covering its face for a little bit. But then we see it taken off. But, like, nothing Eliot did could hurt it. But then the dude shows up and saves him. But he never really explains 100% about how he actually did that. Because it actually turns out, like, oh, he's a magician from Earth. Well, he's not. He says he's not from Earth, but his parents are. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Because then I start thinking, like, are we going to find out there's going to be an interesting twist to who your parents are? Like, that's what I was starting to think. Because a part of me was like, oh, you don't think this is going to trail back to... I was thinking, like, maybe in some shape or form, this is like 300 years later. I was starting to think, like, maybe this is going to trail back to Quentin and Eliot. But it's like, no, he said his parents are from Earth. So that would mean, like, because that was even further in the past, in an alternate timeline. Who knows whether or not that really still exists or not, because that's still a whole thing. Because it seems like, well, no, because that timeline is erased now, so it's kind of, so that's a whole thing in itself. But regardless, it was this kind of interesting conversation that Eliot ended up having with this dude, and I thought was kind of pretty neat, because obviously he was able to kind of recognize, like, oh, Quentin wasn't just someone that Alice loved, you loved him too. Because at first he was like, no, we were good friends. And then it's like, because the reason why Eliot doesn't want to say anything, especially to Alice, it's like she loved him. The fact of the matter is, I don't want to take away that by complicating it with my situation. But it's like, the fact of the matter is, you're not doing yourself and you're not doing her any good. If you tell her about this, you'll give her a full picture of who Quentin is, the person that she loved. You'll actually be giving her something, not taking something away. And so I thought, and I love that line of, like, death is simple, but life is what's really complicated. And I thought that was such an interesting moment. And even I was looking at them and everything. I was like, because it's like, yeah, we should go to sleep before something complicated happens. I was like, yeah, it seemed like y'all were about to, make out and bang. So I was like, oh, it's like, but no, Eliot kind of stopped himself. So when they actually get to the top, to where they can drop everything down into the underworld, I thought it was a real, like, because obviously, for Alice, she at first, is kind of like, do you want to say anything? And obviously Eliot was kind of like, no. But then when it was all said and done, Eliot ends up telling Alice the truth about the letter. And it's like, oh, we could do, but for him, it's like, it's a complicated thing. And even Alice was like, there's no, like, simple way, because you never know the ripple effects. Like, the fact of the matter is, if they sent that letter, it would mean Quentin could be alive, but it would also mean that so many people died. And so even Eliot's trying to think, like, what if we did this and what if we did that? What if you just locked the door? But it's like, if they didn't stop Everett, if Quentin didn't sacrifice himself, who knows how many more people would have died. So, and they can't do that. So it's that thing of, like, you want to be selfish, but at the same time, the price would be too much. And for one, it'd go against what Quentin sacrificed himself for, because, Quentin made peace with his sacrifice, realizing what he did was what he did for the world, what he did for his friends, the impact he had on their lives. It made him kind of feel like, because, he always had a self-confidence issue of kind of his own place in the world, and knowing that this is where he belonged, that he did matter to people, I think, it's kind of an important thing for Quentin. And, I thought it was interesting because Alice is like, you don't think I knew about the whole thing, like Quentin, like how he felt about you, like, because for her, it's like, yeah, her and Quentin had their complicated thing of they were kind of on and off. But for her, she's like, I knew, like, Quentin was a mess. But the fact of the matter is she loved all sides of Quentin, even if he was, a mess in the grand scheme of things. But it's like, I loved him and he loved you and me. It's like, what was I going to tell Quentin? Only love me and only me? No, because he was such a mess. Like, who would I be to tell Quentin out of anyone to do that? But then Eliot ends up telling her telling her a little bit about the Mosaic situation. Obviously, like that life they lived in season 3. And once again, I think this is even more impactful because not only is he telling it to someone, he's telling it to the one person I think it would mean the most, because there's a bond there of these two people who loved Quentin so much, especially for Eliot, because love, I think, has always been a complicated thing for Eliot. And so when it comes around, because especially for Eliot, he's so upset because he's like, basically, we lived a life together. And the fact of the matter is, I basically told him to, screw off. And then what had happened? He died saving me. That's what eats Eliot up. And then even I thought about the grand, and I don't think it really registered in the season 4 finale, but in this episode it hit me. It's like Eliot says it. He never got to talk to Quentin. The only words he actually spoke to Quentin in all of season 4 was when he was telling Quentin, "Hey, I'm still alive." He never really got to fully express the fact of like, he gave hints to the whole, like, like a reminder of their alternate life, that's what gave Quentin a sign that, like, it really was Eliot he was talking to at that time. But Eliot never got the chance to say, I felt it, because remember what Quentin had said. It's like, how often do you get a sign that there's a sure thing, Because I think in the beginning, Alice was probably thinking like, it was just a complicated thing because like, it's like the whole like, because obviously I think it still bugs her the whole like, it definitely still bugs her the whole like Quentin sleeping with Eliot and Margo in season 1. And that still kind of bothered her. But like I said, obviously over the course of the series had their issues, but they still loved each other despite everything. But like I was saying, like he turned Quentin down about the whole like, something being between him, and obviously that was a big regret for him last season in his own head when he was traveling through his remembrances, well, in Eliot's case, and now he never will get an opportunity to tell Quentin like that he felt the same, And like I said, that bond, Eliot can't, deliver the letter, but he also can't throw it away. And so him and Alice end up, doing it together. And it's like, that was brave. And it's like, Quentin was brave. And Alice is like, you're brave. And, and she's like, thank you, Eliot, for telling me that. Like I said, they're able to kind of grieve. And I think this was a good thing for both of them, because this is going to be an opportunity for like, because for one, they can bond over this and they can find closure together. Maybe there'll be some stuff trickling down the path later on during the season because of this. But also it brings up an interesting relationship, like I said, that's never really been fostered, and that's Alice and Eliot. I think that'd be kind of neat to kind of see more time kind of spent between them and what that ends up becoming. But obviously what's interesting is like, they're about to leave and everything, and like, this is, the Dark King, and I'm like, his carriage's about to arrive. I'm like, wait, don't tell me. And it's like, yep, the dude they've been traveling with the entire time has been the Dark King. And I don't think he recognizes who Eliot is. I mean, why would you? Because that was like 300 years ago. But I love that whole, I guess it's been so long. Like, I guess there's no pictures of past rulers, whether it be Eliot. Because at one point, even Alice was one of the high queens back then. But I thought it was interesting, like the fact that, it's like, and even Eliot being like, I almost banged the Dark King. So that's interesting. And also, once again, kind of learning that he's also a magician. At the very least, he has magic because his family. Because what was interesting, though, is he had talked about the fact is that a taker had touched him. It almost spread through his body like a virus, but he cut something out and was able to kind of like I said, we never really got the full details about how you fight back the takers. Because he'd even made a point, I guess that was him hiding that he was the Dark King, because he had made that, because Eliot was like, so I thought it was just a Dark King, but it's like others have found a way, and I'm like, I guess that was him trying to hide his identity. That should have been kind of a key sign there, but Well, it's also interesting too because we did learn like obviously like every year he goes back there to mourn his love who was also a magician. It's like yeah, because that's kind of like the sad thing about being a magician. Like you're going to die young, and obviously that whole conversation resonated with Eliot having recently lost Quentin and everything. So I'm interested to see where that lane of things go. So there's that. The other side of things, there was that thing at the beginning where Finn and Josh were like, we got to tell Margo. And it's like, I'm like, and immediately I'm like, I'm be skipping around. But at the beginning I was like, oh, I was like, did you two bang or something? But then I was like, no, maybe not. Because the way the conversation ended up shifting, I was like, oh, this is what they're... Because it's like the whole idea was like, oh yeah, because she was still branded, there was no way for her to ever kind of really take back control because she would always be banished from the castle and everything. But there was a system put in place where basically it was like a challenge of like the warriors. You pick like 12 ferocious warriors, but by becoming one of those 12, you end up gaining a prize that means undoing any criminal stuff you've done, as well as getting rid of banishment marks. So obviously you have Margo stepping in, pretending to be Janet. And this is an interesting detail that I'm an idiot, and well, because I didn't find this out until last season. I think it was during the season 4 finale. Someone had left a comment informing me this, but if you're unaware, in the books, Margo's character, her character's name is Janet in the books, which I know that, but I've never looked into why they changed her name to Margo in the TV show. Regardless, because I think amongst the main cast, she's the only character who has a different name. I think everyone else has the same name in the books. I just thought that was interesting. But because I think I didn't even recognize it when I was rewatching season 4. Because Janet, the fake name they're giving her, because obviously her name in the book is Janet, so it's supposed to be a reference to that. But do remind me. I'll probably look this up to confirm it on my own. But her name, when everyone was living different lives, the other life she was living, her name was Janet, right? So it was kind of a wink and nod to that even back then. But I think I said it just didn't register in my head at the time because like I said, it wasn't until the season 4 finale happened, and even then, I think rewatching season 4, it wasn't in the forefront of my mind. But regardless, I thought it was interesting that she's, taking up the challenge and everything. But then I'm like, why is Finn going? But I guess because Finn started getting a little aggro. We'll get to that soon enough. So maybe that's what. But I love her seeing the knives. And she's like, man, you are a nut for knives, aren't you? So the fact of the matter is they're both entering and stuff like that. And then obviously like the way that Josh is kind of acting a little like, around Margo. Because Margo's kind of... Because obviously there's 2 full moons on... Fillory right now, so it's like obviously all of them are kind of getting affected by this whole situation. But it was interesting. I was like, oh, there's something going on here. And what I love is the fact is that during the competition, each one, and I even love it. It's like, Finn started kicking some serious ass, especially when she kind of flipped around and kind of cut that dude's like Achilles heel. I'm like, yo, and I even love Josh being like, god damn, and Margo's like, should we have been like kind of not keeping her like in a bad way? I think we should have been using her. I think we've been seriously underusing her or something like that. Basically saying we should have been throwing her in the front line. Because the sad thing is Finn has just never had her time to shine, So this was an opportunity, and I thought it was kind of pretty dope. Some of the fights were a little less bloody than others. There's even at one point where Finn is just swinging her knives around, and you see blood kind of hitting the camera and stuff like that. But it comes down to like, hey, they're the winners and stuff like that. It's pretty badass. And then it's kind of like, we're here with 12. Sadly, there can only be one woman, which is like, okay. It's like, you understand why. And Margo was like, no, we don't understand why. And it's like, and that's exactly the reason why there can only be, and it's like, nice. And then it's like, but Margo was like, yeah, I can't go because like, I can't be here during that, like, I've got other plans. And at that moment, Finn was like, me too. At that moment, I was like, you banged. She's got the werewolf thing now too. I was like, no. And then Margo kind of pieced it together too, being like, the way that Finn was scratching and stuff, and obviously it hurts her a lot. So it turns into a whole situation where like Margo was super pissed, which Josh was telling her to calm down because, especially considering the fact is like the moon and everything, she's going to be likely to kill Finn. And even Finn was like, say some nice words at my funeral. But when the battle goes on, it gets pretty intense. I didn't love Finn being pissed. It's like, come on, you can use magic. I can't. But yeah, when it was all said and done, like Margot stabbing her and killing her, I was like, oh my god. At first I was like, okay, maybe because their lycanthropy is kind of kicking in, maybe that's going to like rapidly heal. And then she pops up and it's like, oh, but then it's like, oh, see, Margot, you're so good because you figured it out. It's like, wait, what? It's like that. This is like this child's play knife. So did you knew it? Baby's first, knife or whatever. So like it's meant for kids, so they don't really hurt themselves. It's like, oh, you went grabbing for that. It's like, I did. And she said, yeah, totally. So now it's like they're in the cages, unwinding, and obviously it turns into a thing of like Finn being like, hey, Margot, can you forgive me? But obviously Margot's not in a forgiving mood because for her it's like, it would, it's like I'm entitled to feel complicated feelings because let me hold on to that because you want me to kind of forgive you so you can make yourself feel better. And it's kind of like, because she's like, I don't care where Josh does whatever with his penis or whatever, who cares? But the sad thing is, she does care. She never actually told this to Josh. She said it while he was a fish. She's like, I think I love this dude. And she does. But obviously there's a whole thing with Eliot where Eliot was kind of, what he brought up, was it last episode? Kind of not last episode. It might have been the episode before that. Referencing the whole, oh yeah, like he wasn't around, what happened to him. She just kind of got caught in her feelings type of situation. And that's not who Margot is type of thing. But sadly, this is kind of what Margot does when she gets hurt. It's the fact that she kind of lashes out. She has a tendency to do that. But the fact is, she loves Josh, and knowing that he slept with Finn, not once, multiple times apparently, it's hurtful because it's like, all she could think about the entire time was getting back to Josh and thinking about what he went through and to know that happened. But the sad thing is, and I don't think it really correlated in my head the last episode, especially when Eliot's bringing up all this stuff at the beginning about like, because obviously Margot is like, well, basically they're all feeling bad and stuff like that, and then Margot drops the bomb on like being like, I'm not a good person, I'm a bad person. And the fact is, she brings up the fact is, I was willing to let you two die. It wasn't my idea to send that letter to you. That was something Eliot did all on his own, because Eliot was like, okay, it's a little lie, but who cares? Like, as long as everyone thinks it was you, it's not that big of a deal. But Margot kind of now feeling guilty about it because now knowing, it's like it's like they're feeling guilty about cheating because like Finn, they're thinking like Finn and in particular Josh is like, you never gave up hope on us, but it turns out, wait, you did. And now Finn, it's like, I fought tooth and nail for you. I went through all this because I felt bad about it and you were just going to let us die. But in Margot's defense, it was like, it was for the kingdom, kind of putting the kingdom first. But at the same time, Finn always feels like, because she thinks of Margot as her friend, but it probably makes her think like, I'm sure she's always questioning it too, especially like a lot of times it's kind of like she's almost like the butt of Margot's jokes and stuff like that to an extent. So it's like, am I even important to you? Which she is. They both are. She cares deeply for Finn. She sacrificed for Finn's sake as well, to get her back and everything, But you can make the argument, it's like, well, was that more so for Eliot or was that for Finn? And obviously Josh, she cares about him deeply. In that moment, you see her so kind of the heartbreak in her eyes because she knows like she potentially has destroyed her relationship with both Finn and Josh, and things probably won't be the same. That in her rage, she kind of broke all that, like And I'm just so sad that things kind of played out like that. I hope there is a means in which that whole situation can be repaired, but we'll ultimately have to wait and see. And then finally, on the other side of things is Julia with Penny, because obviously Penny's still trying to figure out his situation, but it's like Julia's like, I'm kind of leaning in and touching him and everything. He's like, I've got like this headache and stuff like that, so I don't think that's going to be a solution. And she's like, no, you traveling me somewhere. And it's like, oh, me being the good old taxi again. Yeah, because he literally complained about that as the professor being like literally being a taxi for your friends, especially when it comes to the case of the woman he loves. Because it's like, yeah, they have definitely, because obviously at the beginning it was super romantic. That element has definitely died down as the episodes is going on because it's become less and less of an issue. But essentially they're tracking down Daniela. They end up running into her sister Zoe. I did find that information interesting about like apparently like they did some tests that magicians casting actually is like 23% stronger when they drink. That's interesting. Don't drink in magic, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm sure stuff can go wrong, but apparently there's good to that. It's a whole. I think that's interesting. But obviously they tell Zoe about what's going on, but Zoe's like, nah, we're not going to help. And it's like, you're trying to understand why. It's like, yeah, it's kind of saying that the fate of the world is in a balance, but why would you say no? Well, we end up finding out that apparently there are 3 siblings, not just Daniela and Zoe. There was actually a third sister named Beth. Apparently, their senior year, they stopped an apocalypse. Now, what that apocalypse is, we don't know. But we kind of find out the reason why Zoe's been so like, oh, let's not, is because Daniela kind of gets obsessed with this. And I guess her obsession with trying to find an answer to that apocalypse ended with their sister Beth, like either being sacrificed or dying because Daniela just couldn't let the situation go. And maybe even Beth might have sacrificed herself to save Daniela's life because of it. Who knows? But at the end of the day, like, she doesn't have anything to do with it. But Daniela ends up looking into the occurrences, and obviously she has found there is kind of some shape or form bit of a pattern that she recognized. And what was interesting is, I forgot what the terminology she used was. I think it was do you know what the harmonious convergence is or something? It's basically this specific moments where magic is kind of at its strongest or something, essentially. Those being moments like, what was it? The extinction of the dinosaurs, Pompeii, the sinking of Atlantis, and the creation of autotune. I love that because even Julia and Penny kind of looked at each other. It's like, you have to throw in at least one joke answer. But apparently there's going to be a 5th one. But this 5th one is going to also coincide with the circumstances and, what is it, surge. So at that point, magic is going to be so powerful, and then when everything you basically have to tell every magician never to stop using magic, because at that point, like, any magic cast on that day could lead to catastrophic effects, which she's saying like millions could potentially die in it. So, which involves, finding a means to stopping, the circumstances, not just the circumstances, the surges is the word I'm looking for. Kind of finding a way to stop them is going to be the top priority before. And I'm curious what this 5th thing is. That 5th thing is probably going to be something pretty significant within the confines of the story, or it might be something crazy like, the creation of autotune. That's interesting. But what I also thought was kind of interesting too, and it's kind of something I was bringing up earlier, is where Penny and Julia stand. Because it's the whole conversation of why, like, obviously Zoe was like, we just want to live our lives. We've done enough for saving the world and everything. So how about aren't we deserve just to live our lives? And obviously Penny kind of brings that up, like, how much is enough? Because it's not just this. It's been one thing after another. Since season 2, there was just one more apocalypse. All magic was gone. There was one more apocalypse. Getting magic back, but that being in the the bad guys, the library's hands, and then obviously the monster, and then what the library was up to with magic. It's just been one apocalypse after another, and now we're in this. So it's kind of like, when is enough? And the argument could be like, it's like, and Penny's like, 'cause one day he wants to just kind of settle down. He wants to just have a happy life with Julia, and she's like, I want that. But he's kind of like, I know that's not what you want. She's like, I know. For him, it's like he knows she kind of wants something different, but he's like, for now, I get it. Fact of the matter, we got to put that aside, deal with this, but eventually we're going to circle back to this thing, because obviously, as we can tell with this whole conversation, like, a magician's life is so short. You never know. Obviously, things didn't work out for Katie and Penny 40, seeing those circumstances. Look at Quentin, he died, so it's like, it kind of puts that all in perspective, but it's that thing of like, like I said, I think Julia's so striving to fulfill that, honoring her best friend Q, that she's just kind of letting other things kind of fall to the wayside. So it's just kind of an interesting conversation that kind of got brought up. But I'm really interested to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.